These are both 100-gram balls of yarn. They both have wool in. This one will cost you £20. This one costed me £4. But is hand-dyed yarn better than commercial yarn? Let's chat about it. Hey everyone, it's Hannah, and today I'm going to be discussing the difference between hand-dyed yarn, commercial yarn, if hand-dyed yarn is better than commercial dyed yarn. I'm just going to talk about each point and let you come to your conclusion yourself. For those of you who don't know, hello, I am a yarn dyer. This is yarn from my own hand-dyed yarn, chromatic yarns. You may think, Hannah, this makes you extremely biased. You can't talk about this topic, but all I'm asking is for you to hear me out. Hear me out, form your own opinion, let me know what you think in the comments below. When you are knitting or crocheting a project, the yarn that you use has a huge impact on the outcome of said project. We've already talked about the differences in breeds of sheep, the differences in weights of yarn, plies of yarn, all of that. I talked about it in a video a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to go into depth about that now because that's not what this video is about. But a popular discussion is hand-dyed yarn better than commercial dyed yarn? First of all, what is hand-dyed yarn? Hand-dyed yarn is yarn that has, shockingly, been dyed by hand. Oh, I know! How unexpected. It's also known as like indie dyed yarn, and it's often produced in very small batches by either an individual or a very small number of people. Because the yarn is dyed in such small batches, I personally dye yarn in a pan, and there's 4 skeins in a pan. So it means that each skein is somewhat unique, and it's almost like you're buying someone's art. So these yarns are often produced by micro businesses or very, very small businesses. I believe a micro business is a team of under 9 people. And I think even some of the huge names in the yarn dyeing businessy world, and I'm not talking big box shops, I'm talking out of all the indie dyers, which is another term for hand dyers. I think everyone is technically a micro business, but a lot of the people that I know are a team of 1, maybe 2. On the other hand, commercial yarn is produced in much larger quantities with machines dyeing them. This produces really consistent colorways, I mean, in theory, technically, and yeah, commercial yarn is what you'll find in a lot of yarn shops here in the UK, or wool shops, regardless as if there's wool in it or not. In the UK, we would call, even if it's 100% acrylic, we would call it a ball of wool. So if I slip up and you get confused, that is what I'm talking about. So because commercial yarn is generally dyed by bigger businesses, they have more space and more money. They often have a bigger warehouse. You know how much space I have to store my dyed yarn in? Is this room I'm sitting in right here, which whilst it is quite large, it's not actually that much space. It gets very full very quickly. So commercial yarn dyers are, or commercially dyed yarn, apologies, are able to dye yarn in a bigger variety of colours. They have the space to store all of those different colours, and they have the finances to be able to afford to do that as well. Machine dyeing, as I mentioned, creates consistent colourways as well, although these may vary by dye lot. But if you run out of a ball of wool and you're halfway through a project, or you're halfway through a sleeve, let's say, you get to here and you think, oh, I didn't buy enough. You can often go to the shop and buy a ball of yarn of the same dye lot and finish knitting the sleeve, and it matches. This isn't always the way though. Over the spring, I knit 2 jumpers out of King Cole Jamboree, and even though they are the same dye lot, the sleeve and the body, or the 2 balls were slightly different and very annoying, but it's fine, they're toddler jumpers, baby jumpers. The pickle wears it anyway, she doesn't complain. As I've previously mentioned, hand-dyed yarn is dyed in much smaller quantities, which adds much more individualism to each skein. I could dye 4 skeins of yarn in a pan, and each one will come out looking very slightly, not hugely different, very slightly different to one another. This means that if you don't buy enough for a project, and then you ask if you can buy an extra kit, first of all, they might not be dyeing that colourway anymore, and secondly, if they do dye it especially for you, it might differ from the ones that you already have. That's why we say to alternate skeins when you're knitting using hand-dyed yarn. I'm usually pretty good at that. The jumper I'm currently knitting, I'm not alternating skeins, and seems to be paying off, but you can't always guarantee that. As I mentioned, I just have this room to store all my yarn in. I cannot have every single colour of the rainbow and then everyone in between in stock in my shop at all times. I physically do not have the money or space to dye that much yarn and store it on the off chance someone might buy it. This is why a lot of yarn dyers tend to do either drops where they have a limited number of skeins available to purchase ready to ship, or they do collections, which seems to be a bit of a bigger thing at the moment in the hand-dyed world. So when an indie dyer launches a collection, it tends to be based on a theme, and it tends to be open for pre-order. So it's not ready to ship, but you can order it and they will send it to you in a number of weeks. Usually it's specified during the pre-order how many weeks you're gonna have to wait for your yarn, because yeah, like I have mentioned multiple times, these businesses are small teams. These are micro businesses. And whilst they try their best to do a quick turnaround, it is not always possible. We're not Amazon, and we're very happy about that. Even solid colorways with hand-dyed yarn often have some tonality to them, but we also dye variegated colorways. We love a speckle, at least in chromatic yarns. I love variegated yarn. I love a speckle. I just think it's so fun. I know they're not for everyone. I know people like solid colours more. That's absolutely fine. Everyone has their preference. Give me a bit of jazz and pizzazz any day. But something people really dislike about hand-dyed yarn is the limited availability of it. If a collection explodes, and I'm saying it now, I personally have not had a collection that has sold more than, I'm pretty sure more than 500 skeins of yarn. And to me, that is a lot. Maybe 450, it doesn't matter. I haven't had a collection sell more than 500 skeins of yarn, and that is a lot of yarn. And it took me a long time to turn it around. But I do know that some people have sold 1,000 skeins of yarn in a collection plus, and it has taken them weeks and weeks and weeks to do a turnaround. So I personally would find it extremely stressful to have a collection sell that much yarn. So I would put a limit. Now this means that not everyone can buy as much as they potentially want to, or they find the collection late and think, I missed it, I really want to buy that colourway, and maybe the dyer isn't dyeing it anymore, and that really does annoy some people because they feel like they're missing out. And they also, people seem to have a false idea, now I'm just going off on a tangent, that dyers set false limits on how much yarn they're selling to make them look more popular than they are. I personally do not know of any businesses doing this, but I mean, maybe there are. I don't know of any. But that's wild. People complain that the turnaround time is too long, and then they complain because they can't buy the yarn because the business has set a limit on how many they can sell. That's a side topic. That's a different rant for a different day. For the most part, commercial dyed yarn, unless a line of yarn is discontinued, you can basically buy whatever colour and whatever base of yarn that you want with commercial dyed yarn. If I wanted to buy King Cole Jamboree and Glow Stick, I could go and buy some because it's not been discontinued yet. But if I wanted to buy, hey, if you wanted to buy this colourway from me, what's this? Man with the Big Purple Hand from Chromatic Yarns, you wouldn't be able to. I don't have any in stock, for example. That's a Critical Role colourway, if anyone gets the reference. Your yarn budget will be a huge contributing factor into what yarn you're buying. Not everyone has the same yarn budget. Times are really tough at the moment, and I get it. I completely get it. As I mentioned before, this yarn it would cost you £20. Actually, I think it's a bit more because it's yak sock. This yarn cost me £4. These are both 100 grams. They're different weights of yarn. They are different weights of yarn. Okay, cool. Let's do this yarn. These are both DK weight yarn. This one did cost me £20 because I bought it from the Crafty Bird, and this one still cost me £4 from Knit Nottingham. They both have wool in. How much wool? This has 40% wool. This is 100% wool. So the fibre content is drastically different. So your budget will be a huge contributing factor into this. Recently, there has been the Aldi yarn event. They are selling balls of wool for £1.29. That's how much this ball of wool was, £1.29. I knit a jumper out of it. If I were to knit this jumper out of hand-dyed yarn, this would have cost £40, which for a toddler is ridiculous. The jumper I'm currently wearing is my own hand-dyed yarn, so it's a little bit different, but I used 4 skeins of mohair, 3 skeins of, we'll say 3. I used 3 skeins of mohair, so that's £60, plus 3 skeins of DK weight yarn. So that's, no, £66 plus £60. This jumper would cost me £126 to make. Oh my gosh. But it is my own hand-dyed yarn, so obviously it is a little bit cheaper because it's the wholesale. Speaking of, the reason that hand-dyed yarn is as expensive as it is, dyeing is a really time-consuming process, and many of us want to be able to live off something that we put so much time into. I put more than full-time hours into this, and so I would like to pay myself a full-time wage. This means that we actually have to charge a good amount per skein of yarn. In fact, I got a whole video talking about a collection that I did last year and the money that I made from it. I break it all down. I talk about the expenses, blah, blah, blah. Basically, for example, if I wanted to buy an undyed skein of yarn, I can't buy it for £4. An undyed skein of yarn is more than this. So that is one reason I can't sell it for £4. I'll link that video in the description box below, because it actually shocked me how much money that I spent. Every single time I was just like, and then there's this expense, and then there's this expense, and then there's this expense. I was just like, oh my, why am I spending so, where's all my money going now? Oh my God. It was quite eye-opening to break it down. So commercial yarn, often cheaper. They can make it in much larger quantities. And also often when we're comparing cost, we're not comparing like for like. This is not merino wool. This is, I mean, it's recycled wool. But I don't know what kind of recycled wool. And it's also 40% polyester and 20% recycled acrylic. Now, plastic is obviously cheaper than wool. That feels like a given. But because commercial companies can buy yarn in much larger quantities to then dye, spin, whatever, they often get quite a good deal. Now, the mills that a lot of UK dyers shop from work with much smaller farms who have much smaller herds of sheep, goats, whatever, and these animals are often better cared for, better looked after, and in my opinion, this produces much better quality yarn. Like, just think about like cheap mohair versus hand-dyed mohair, and that cheap mohair is always that much more scratchier than hand-dyed mohair. This mohair is wonderful. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I like both hand-dyed yarn and commercial dyed yarn. There are places for both of them in my wardrobe. I have lots of jumpers made by hand-dyed yarn that I've knit myself. I have a lot of jumpers that my mum has knit for me from commercial yarn. I have a lot of jumpers that are 100% acrylic. I have some jumpers, this is making me sound like I have so many jumpers. I'm just kind of lumping them all together. I have jumpers that have, this one has no plastic in it at all. I knit jumpers for my daughter. This is much too big for her. Jumper for my daughter that's £1.29 a ball. I knit my husband socks using commercial dyed yarn because I think it's ridiculous to spend £20 on yarn for him to wear a hole through them instantly. I've done that too many times. I have learned my lesson. So I love commercial yarn. I think it's great. I think it has its place. I use it for a lot of gift knits. I use it for a lot of baby knits. But I love hand-dyed yarn because I like the thought process and the story behind the yarn. You're buying someone's artwork, is what I believe. And there's a reason for the colours that they chose, and then there's a reason for the colour placement. I just think that it's just that little bit more interesting than just using commercial dyed yarn. There are some people out there, I'm sure, who do this, but very few people are just sort of flinging dye on yarn and being like, that'll do, that'll do. There's often intention behind what they're doing, and I love that. So which do you prefer to use and why? Or have you not yet ventured into the world of hand-dyed yarn? I do understand why people are hesitant to venture into the world of hand-dyed yarn. It is expensive. It is expensive, and it feels like a shock. If you're used to buying a £4, or I don't know, if you're used to buying £1.29 ball of wool, all of a sudden being faced with a skein of yarn that's £25 can be a huge shock. I get it. the point of this video wasn't to convince you to start buying hand-dyed yarn. That was not my intention at all. I love commercial yarn too. We all have a place here. But let me know what you prefer. Or are you a bit like me and you think both of them have a place in your stash? What do you use for which kinds of projects? That kind of thing. Please let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed chatting yarn with me again. If you did, you would like to see more, I post a new video here every single Friday, so it'd be lovely if you were to stick around and subscribe. Links to all my social media can be found in the description box below, along with anything else that I think you might need. If a once a week video isn't enough for you, I do have a Patreon where you can get a bonus video every single week. I'm doing a lot of studio vlogs over there at the moment, so if you miss the studio vlogs here and you want to see more studio vlogs, feel free to join the Biscuit Brew crew or Chai Latte crew if there's spots in the Chai Latte crew. And yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for being amazing. Thank you for sticking around and watching this video. I truly do appreciate your support. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.